Jack Thunder and the Snotty Snail. Beyond the boundaries of this world, there exists another world not unlike our own. Powered by the essence of magic and life itself, this world is known by many names. Its denizens, however, know it by one: Alterus. Deep within Alterus lies a forest known as the Emerald Woodland. These wild, verdant woods are home to many creatures within Alterus, from great forest dragons and white stags to smaller creatures like bunnies and squirrels. Not all creatures within the Emerald Woodland are so wonderful or magnificent, however. Some are quite slimy. Such was the case for a creature living deep within the deepest, darkest, smelliest part of the forest. Her name was Snotter Snail. Snotter was no ordinary snail. She was a fairy snail, much bigger than the snails you and I know. She was a little under 5 feet tall, and while she had the antennae and shell of a snail, she had arms and legs like a person. And she had a massive problem. You see, Snotter got her name from a particularly nasty habit of hers. Whenever she got particularly upset, she would spit gobs of mucus out of her mouth. Anyone who was unlucky enough to come into contact with Snotter's snot would start coughing and sneezing, and even the plants that touched it would start to wilt. Because of this, Snotter lived a solitary life. She spent her days tending to her small mushroom garden next to her house cut out of the face of a boulder, and that was how she liked it. It was a few nights after the dawn of autumn that this all changed. That August night, a thunderstorm broke out in the Emerald Woodland. Through the rain and the hail, Snotter swore she could see mountains buried in the roiling storm clouds, illuminated by flashes of lightning. Mountains that she had never seen before, almost like she was looking at a massive floating continent. The next morning, the floating island was gone, but it had left behind a massive mess. When Snotter saw the damage the storm had done to her garden, her temper flared. Mucus gathered in her mouth, and she sprayed it everywhere she could see. The ground, trees, and even part of Snotter's house were coated in slime. "Yikes, what are you doing to your house there? I don't think that's how you're supposed to paint it." "Say what?" Snotter had never heard that voice before. It sounded like it was coming from behind her. She whipped around, but all she saw was an old oak tree. She scowled. Great. First my garden is destroyed, now someone's playing games with me. And just like that, Snotter heard the cracking of branches and a startled yelp as a figure fell out of the tree and into the thicket below. Snotter could hear the stranger muttering in irritation before he stood up. She could have mistaken him for a forest sprite at first. Barely taller than her, he wore a full-body hooded jumpsuit the color of pine needles, with gloves and shoes in a lighter shade of green. However, as Snotter continued to look him over, she came to another conclusion. She had heard stories about fairies from outside the forest. To her, he resembled what she'd heard about storm gremlins, small, troublesome air fairies who lived on floating islands in the clouds high above the sky. She recalled reading about how each wore a jumpsuit with a badge symbolizing their powers and place in their society. This stranger's badge held a picture of a lime green lightning bolt ending in a pointed arrow. He sat up and looked at her. "What in Alterus were you doing to your yard?" he repeated. "You should know, you ruined it last night," Snotter snarled back. "What? Not me, I just got here." "How do you explain this, then?" Snotter gestured to her destroyed garden. "Well, from the looks of it, you lost your temper and spit all over it." The storm gremlin narrowly dodged a gob of mucus Snotter spit at him. He heard a door slam, and looking over, he could see Snotter had already gone back into her house. He turned his gaze back to where the gob of slime had landed and saw that the unfortunate flowers it had landed on had already lost their color. He frowned. "Sheesh, I know I have a bad attitude sometimes, but that was just completely out of proportion. I was only trying to be honest with her." He turned back to the ruined garden. "Maybe if I try and help her with this." He created a small rain cloud at his fingertips, and it began to grow. When it was big enough for him to ride on, he released it into the garden. As it began to rain, the soil below began to glow faintly. Within a few minutes, all the mucus had washed away and the garden was good as new. After that was done, he directed the cloud to the side of the house to wash the mucus off the side. Upon hearing the rain smacking against her walls, Snotter stormed outside, ready to give the gremlin a piece of her mind. Upon seeing her newly mended garden, however, her words died on her tongue. She stared at it for what seemed like an eternity. Did you do this? He stopped to look back at her and nodded. Figured it could help. Healing rain works wonders for most things. Healing rain? She'd used healing earth magic in the past, but she didn't know that there were air spells that did the same thing. He continued. Tempest Island passed over here last night. It's still not that far away. I came back here just to have some lunch, but it looks like the storm did a lot more damage than I thought. He assessed the decimated forest around him. This is gonna take a while to fix. I see. I know a few healing spells myself that might help. So they worked together to clean up the forest. The storm gremlin washed the slime off the rocks with his rain cloud, and Snotter used the power of earth to renew the plants and animals who had been harmed by storm or snot. When they were done, save for a few twigs strewn about here and there, the forest was as if the storm had never touched it. Wow, I guess I misjudged you. Sorry about trying to slime you earlier. Don't worry about it. By the way, what's your name? Snotter. People call me Snotter. The gremlin smiled. I'm Jack Thunder. People say that I'm like a thunderhead sometimes, so I guess it fits. That would explain the lightning bolt symbol on his badge. Snotter smiled, happy that she wasn't the only one stuck with a name revealing her less pretty traits. They each said their quick goodbyes before Jack Thunder rode away atop the storm cloud he'd created. As Snotter watched him ride towards a mountain in the clouds and vanish into the ether, she thought about what he'd said about Tempest Island. Where was it going next, she wondered, and when would she see him again? One of these days, she decided, she would have to find Tempest Island once again.